has sort of shifted momentum in the race. What's the latest?
Well, momentum has certainly shifted in this race, as it does just days before any presidential election. That's at least what history teaches us. About 2 weeks ago, I can tell you that Hillary Clinton was leading this race by something between 8 and 12 points. That average has gone down to between 3 and 6 points, and closing. Donald Trump has momentum at his back since that letter from James Comey that they were reopening the Hillary Clinton email survey investigation, and that really has shifted momentum in this race to the Republican side. But if you look at this holistically, Hillary Clinton has been leading in the polls consistently for a number of months now, and that will certainly help her given the advantage that the Democratic Party and the Hillary Clinton campaign has in terms of their ground game. That's the get out the vote process that happens on election day, and that is advantage Clinton on that score.
Now, Sherwin, we often hear about swing states and the Electoral College. Why are these two terms that have now become central to any discussion around the election?
Let me talk about swing states later. Let's start with the Electoral College. It's a really simple process that is very difficult to explain. Essentially, the Electoral College is made up of 538 electors. Those electors essentially elect the President of the United States. What you then have are different states and millions of people that go out and vote. Each state has a certain number of electors that vote in the Electoral College assigned to it. So a state like California is the biggest prize. It has 55 electors in the Electoral College. So you want to win that state, right? New York has 29. Florida has 29. Texas has 38. So those are the big states. The most populous states tend to have the most number of electors. What each presidential candidate then has to do is win enough states to win the majority of electors to the Electoral College. So if you have 538 electors to the college, you want to basically reach 270. 270 Electoral College votes is the prize that wins you the White House. And right now, the Democratic Party, Hillary Clinton, has an advantage because all those big states, New York, California, they go Democratic, so she can bank on those Electoral College votes. Donald Trump, therefore, has a much harder path because he has a lot of support in the middle of the country. The South Dakotas, your Montanas, your Indianas, they offer fewer electors to the Electoral College, so he has to piece together more states to reach 270.
Now, Sherwin, you've just attended a briefing on election fraud. Give us the latest on that.
Well, the briefing on electoral fraud was at the Foreign Press Center, just up the corner to my right. Right behind me, of course, you have Donald Trump, that has the Donald Trump Tower behind me. And of course, it was Donald Trump that raised concerns about a rigged system in this election. He's told his supporters to go to polling stations and monitor that there is no electoral fraud. And what we just had at the Foreign Press Center was a briefing by the Secretary of State of the state of Connecticut. She is essentially the electoral officer in charge of all the electoral processes in that state. And she was explaining to me that because there is a decentralized system in the United States, there's no federal system that manages elections here. It's down to different states, and in different states they have different rules. So literally, a county in a state can be responsible for what happens in that county. A local municipality, a local council can be responsible in a city or a town for what happens in terms of the election in that state. And she was saying that it's therefore, because it's not a centralized system, it's very difficult to hack, it's very difficult to influence very independent systems around the country. In addition to that, she explained in Connecticut, they have a paper ballot. You cross off or you make holes next to the candidate, whether it's the president or the senator you want elected. It then gets inserted into a machine, and at the end of that process, the machine stores those paper ballots and then spits out the results at the end. So 99.5% accurate, she tells us. So basically, taking the wind out of the sails, if you will, of Donald Trump's accusation that this is a process that might be rigged.
Now, we've also seen reports around terror threats and violence around the election. What's the FBI saying?
Well, federal authorities alerting electoral officers in various states around the country that there is an Al-Qaeda threat around election day, but they've emphasized the states of New York, Texas and Virginia. But of course, this is a national event in the United States, and like international, national events anywhere in the world, these are the times of our lives. There is always a consideration that has to be factored in terms of disruptors that want to influence this election, whether it be through cyber hacking, whether it be through physical attacks around the country. So this is a heightened state of security. This is a national event. I can tell you the Port Authority that is responsible for places like airports, bridges and tunnels in New York is on high alert. They say they will continue their high patrols that have been in place even before this alert came out.
Now, we've seen that there's already been 30 million people who've already voted in early voting. Are we beginning to see any trends, or are we jumping the gun?
Well, it's an interesting question, right? Almost 30 million people have already voted in this election. Of course, the majority will come out on Tuesday next week. But let me just give you some numbers. In Colorado, about 1.4 million people have voted so far. We're getting numbers that say 36% of those are Democrats, 35% of those are Republicans. So that's pretty much a dead heat right now. Colorado is one of those swing states that sometimes go Democrat, that sometimes go Republican. It's a toss-up right now. Florida, also a very, very important swing state. Who can forget the Bush versus Gore election in 2000? It all came down to Florida, right? In Florida, 4.8 million people have voted so far. Advantage to the Republicans in Florida. 39.8% have voted Democrats, 40% Republicans, a dead heat there. In Nevada, we're seeing 622,000, 42% are voting Democrat, 36.9% are voting Republican, so advantage to the Democrats. And so you'll see different of the advantage Democrat, advantage Hillary Clinton, advantage Trump, depending on which swing state you're talking about right now. But of course, it all comes down to what happens on Tuesday next week.
Sherwin, we have to leave it there for now. Thank you so much for joining us. That was our correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease joining us live from New York.